Now, coming to the motor neuron, like in the previous slides, we have come across these terms like alpha motor neuron, gamma motor neuron, interneuron, Renshaw cell. Renshaw cell we have covered in the previous classes, but a little bit about all these four things before going into the detail. Like alpha motor neuron, gamma motor neuron, they are the motor neurons, means these are the lower motor neurons, not only the lower motor neurons. And lower motor neurons, when I say lower motor neuron, means the final neuron which is ending at the effector organ, that is the skeletal muscle, which is forming a synapse with the skeletal muscle, neuromuscular junction. Okay. So, whether it is the alpha motor or the gamma motor. So, what are the difference between the alpha and gamma motor neuron? The broader aspect, like say we have read about the skeletal muscle, read so many things, but still a bit of the part is missing, and that part is like say if I try to draw the diagram, say okay, I will try to draw this one in the form, say this is the muscle, I am just trying. Okay, this part is tendon, this tendon end, okay, and this is the this part is the fleshy one, and fleshy one is this part is, we can say, one second, let me do it. Fleshy part was middle fleshy, that is the belly of the muscle. Okay, this tendon, this fleshy part, and there is again this tendon and fleshy part. Now, this fleshy part, there are the fibers like this way, but inside this fleshy part, I will try to draw with a different color. There is spindle shape formation of the fibers, they are the fibers. Now, these blue one, they are inside, innermost, so they are called as intrafusal fiber, intrafusal. Okay, intrafusal fiber, and this green one is not the green, the blue one, and this blue one, they are the intrafusal fiber, and the red one is, these red one, they are the extrafusal fiber. Now, whether this is the intrafusal or the extrafusal, both of them, they are getting the efferent fiber coming from the spinal motor neuron, spinal cord. So, the fiber, the motor neuron which are ending on the extrafusal fiber, they are called as alpha motor neuron, and the fiber or the lower motor neuron which are coming from the spinal cord and ending on the intrafusal fibers, they are called as gamma motor neuron, gamma and alpha motor neuron. Okay. So, the alpha motor neuron, they are the largest neuron, and gamma, they are very small as compared to the alpha. Alpha motor neuron innervate the extrafusal fiber, the outermost fiber, but the gamma motor neuron, they innervate the intrafusal fiber, and these intrafusal fiber are modified skeletal muscle fiber which forms muscle spindle, that we will talk about in detail in coming slide. Okay. And the alpha motor neuron which innervates the extrafusal fiber, and these extrafusal fiber are responsible for contraction of the skeletal muscle. If we look at the diagram, the extrafusal fiber, 90%, almost 90, more than 90% of the fiber forms extrafusal, and they are responsible factor for the contraction of skeletal muscle. And the remaining 5 to 10%, the innermost, which form the muscle spindle, even it may be less than the 5 to 10%, they are responsible for maintenance of the muscle tone. They are not the entire fiber, they are not contractile, they actually act as a sensor of the stretch, that we will talk about in detail in coming slides. Just remember, the alpha motor neuron innervates the extrafusal fiber and gamma motor neuron innervates the intrafusal fiber. That is the major difference. The second is difference is interneuron and Renshaw cell. If you can recall back, Renshaw cell is a type of interneuron. Like say, if I try to draw the diagram, this is dorsal root ganglia, like sensation is coming going to the spinal cord. Say this is the spinal cord, and suppose that is the motor neuron coming back. So, in between this ascending fiber or afferent fiber and this efferent fiber, there may be only one synapse, monosynaptic. There might not be any neuron in between, but if there is in between one more neuron or many more neurons, these neurons they are called as interneuron. Okay. These neurons are called as interneuron. So, interneurons, Renshaw cell is type of that interneuron and it is inhibitory. So, particular variety of the interneuron is Renshaw cell, inhibitory neurons. They receive input from collateral branches of axon alpha motor neuron. If I try to draw the diagram, say if you can recall back, suppose this alpha motor neuron, and alpha motor neuron is going to extrafusal fiber. It gives, this is the effector organ, skeletal muscle. It gives one branch, say this one branch, it is going to one of the interneuron, and that interneuron is ultimately synapsing with alpha motor neuron. This interneuron is Renshaw cell and it happens to be inhibitory, right? It happens to be inhibitory. So, alpha motor neuron is the red one, it gives one branch to the blue one, and this blue one is interneuron, that is forming the synapse with alpha motor neuron, and it is inhibitory. Okay. So, that is the Renshaw cell carry back the impulses to the cell body of the same alpha motor neuron. So, synaptic inhibition at spinal cord. So, one of the interneuron. Okay. Now, coming to the thing, as I said, there are the three levels we can divide how the motor system functions: higher center, the cortical one, middle center, the brainstem one, and the lower center, that is the spinal cord one. So, in the lowermost column, that is the spinal cord one, it controls, probably we can say it controls the movement of muscle and joint, it controls the muscle tone and power of the muscle, control the deep tendon reflexes and superficial reflexes. So, one by one we will cover all these things. Reflexes. So, before going to this thing, the skeletal muscle, the effector organ. Who is the effector organ of this entire motor system? The skeletal muscle. They are contracting or relaxing. So, let us know a bit about these skeletal muscle that we are not aware till now. We have read about the skeletal muscle, but we do not know these things. In three segments we will read. One is motor unit, second is muscle sensor, proprioceptors. What is proprioception? Proprioception is to be aware about the position of the body position. कि आप बैठे हो, खड़े हो, like whatever kind of the movement is happening around a particular joint. Okay. So, any movement that happens around a particular joint, that movement will occur because of muscles which are forming, which are present around that joint, right. And the third part is muscle tone we will talk about. So, what is motor unit? Motor unit is, it consists of a single motor neuron and the muscle fiber innervated by it. Like if we try to draw the diagram, say this is a motor neuron, okay, single motor neuron, and it is supplying so many muscle fibers, like say these muscle fibers. So, this entire thing, this motor neuron and the muscle fiber supplied by this motor neuron, this entire thing, it is forming as a unit, fundamental or functional unit of this motor system. This is called as motor unit. Okay. This is called as motor unit, right. So, the fundamental module used by the motor control system to carry out a movement is the motor unit. So, movement depends upon the pattern and ratio or the rate of discharge of the motor neurons supplying the muscle that we have read. Now, the second part was muscle sensor, like the proprioceptor or the receptors for this proprioception. They are present in muscle, tendon, joint, ligament and fascia, and they give information about the change in position of different part of the body in space, that is the proprioception. So, these sensors are different name. One is muscle spindle, the second one is Golgi tendon organ, then there are the free nerve ending, and then there is the Pacinian corpuscle. So, these last two one, the Pacinian corpuscle and free nerve ending, we have read about, we know about them, but we do not know much about muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ. So, this muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ, they are nothing but they are sensory receptor for the change in muscle length, and they will sense that change in the muscle length and send the signal via the afferent fiber to the spinal cord, right. Then what the spinal cord will do? Spinal cord, within the spinal cord, those afferent fiber which are carrying the sensation from the muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ, these neuron will form synapse with alpha motor neuron or the gamma motor neuron. And what does the alpha motor neuron or gamma motor neuron do? They will end over the skeletal muscle, right. So, this entire circuit is completed from the muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ. The stretch is sensed that is present in these muscle tendon organ, muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ, they are present within the skeletal muscle. They will sense the stretch, they will send the sensation, that stretch sensation, to the spinal cord. From the spinal cord, within the spinal cord, they will form the synapse with the motor neuron, which is efferent fiber coming back to the skeletal muscle. This entire circle is called as reflex arc. So, basic unit of, like you are doing the stretching, like if we take the example of the knee jerk reaction, we will hit the tendon of the quadriceps femoris with the knee hammer, means we are stretching it by hitting, and that stretch is sensed by muscle spindle, and muscle spindle will sense that stretch, and via the afferent fiber it will go to the spinal cord, and from the within the spinal cord it will form the synapse with the alpha motor neuron, and alpha motor neuron will come back to the quadriceps femoris, make it contract, and what kind of the movement will happen? The extension of the leg. So, this entire arc is from this called as reflex arc. So, a reflex is, if anybody asks you what is reflex, define reflex. Reflex is an involuntary response to a peripheral nervous system stimulation, or we can say it is a mechanism by which sensory impulse is automatically converted into a motor effect through the involvement of nervous system, and this basic unit of reflex activity is called as reflex arc. So, if we look at the reflex arc, it consists of a sense organ, right, a sense organ that happens to be muscle spindle. Then there will be afferent neuron which will carry that sensation, right. Then it will form the synapse, depending upon, it can be one synapse, that is called as monosynaptic, or many synapse, polysynaptic within central integrated station. Who is central integrating station? Spinal cord, and from the spinal cord those motor neuron, alpha motor neuron coming back to the skeletal muscle, they are the efferent neuron, and they will end at the skeletal muscle. And what is skeletal muscle? It is an effector, means it will bring about the effect, contraction of the muscle, right. So, we can say the activity in this reflex arc, it starts in a sensory receptor, like as shown in this diagram. It starts in a sensory receptor with a receptor potential, like we hit the tendon with the knee hammer, there is that receptor potential generation. It will get generated, it will create the action potential within this effect, this one afferent neuron, this dorsal root ganglion, afferent neuron, there will be action potential, it will form the synapse within the spinal cord, this is central integrating station, release the neurotransmitter. This is just an example of monosynaptic reflex, basic example of monosynaptic. This afferent neuron, it is forming synapse with efferent neuron, right. So, this synapse, it's like afferent neuron at this synapse is releasing the neurotransmitter, generating the action potential in the efferent neuron, which is forming the synapse with the muscle at neuromuscular junction, releasing the neurotransmitter and making the muscle to contract by generating the action potential. So, we can say this connection between the afferent neuron and efferent neuron, right, within this central nervous system, it is forming the reflex arc, and activity in this reflex arc, it is modified by multiple inputs that are converging on efferent neuron. Those multiple inputs coming from the higher center can be coming from the brain stem, can be coming from the this one cerebellum or the cortical level. It will merge at efferent neuron, and accordingly this reaction of the efferent neuron will get modified to perform a smooth and precise movement, right. Now, if we, this thing is called as reflex. So, we can say the reflexes, they have got different classifications, and these classification can be based on number of the synapses. If there is only one synapse, then it is called as monosynaptic reflex, and the basic example of the monosynaptic reflex is stretch reflex. Like we hit the knee hammer on the quadriceps femoris, means we are stretching that quadriceps femoris tendon and it is making that quadriceps femoris muscle to contact, that is the monosynaptic. Then the disynaptic, the example of disynaptic is inverse stretch reflex. Then there are the polysynaptic, and the example of polysynaptic reflex are withdrawal reflex, cross flexor reflex and cross extensor reflex. One by one we will cover all these reflexes. Just remember over here for the time being that these are the example of polysynapse, means more than two synapses will be formed in these type of the reflexes. Then the classification can be based on the anatomical, like position of the, like part of the body which is the central integrating station. If it is the cortical level, then cortical reflex, cerebellar level, cerebellar reflex, midbrain reflex, bulbar means the cranial nerve nuclei or the spinal reflexes. So, this is based on the anatomy, which part is playing the role in controlling that reflex to happen. Okay. Then there is classification of physiologically flexor reflex and extensor reflex, depending on like what kind of the thing is happening, or we can say like say the flexor reflexes which is happening in response to like say the painful stimulus, and flexion of the joint is happening, like you are withdrawing your hand, that is the example of the flexor reflex. Extensor reflex is like stretch reflex. Say if we stand up, in the standing position the gravity is acting on our body, so the anti-gravity muscles they always remain in a constant contracted state to prevent the gravity, like to nullify the effect of the gravity, anti-gravity muscles. So, these reflexes are extensor reflexes. Now, the other classification can be inborn versus acquired. Inborn means some of the reflexes which are present since birth, and the example is like they don't require any training or they don't need to be learned, like reflex salivation. When any object is put in the mouth, automatically there will be the salivation reflexly, that is inborn. And acquired is Acquired reflex is also known as conditioned reflex, means your body is conditioned to that particular reflex, like upon seeing, upon the sight or the smell or thought of a particular type of the food, there will be reflex salivation, and this type of the reflex salivation upon the sight or thinking we have learned throughout the life. So that's why they are called as acquired reflexes. Then there is clinical classification, whether there is a superficial or deep or the visceral or the pathological. The superficial one is depending on the sensory receptor, like for any reflex to take place there should be stimulus, and if that stimulus is happening or sensed at the superficial level, means skin, like if you are providing a painful stimulus, that pain is sensed in the skin. So, that is the superficial reflex. Deep reflex or deep tendon reflex, like I gave you the example of knee jerk reaction, like you are hitting the tendon of quadriceps femoris with the knee hammer. So, that is the tendon reflex or deep reflex, means the sensor for this type of the reflex is present deep in the body within the tendon. Okay. Similarly, if there is visceral, if the sensation is happening in the sensory receptor present in the viscera, the inner part of the body, or pathological. Pathological is like ideally in a normal condition they are not supposed to happen the reflex activity, but there is some issue within the body, pathology, that is generating those reflexes, that is the pathological reflexes. Okay.